Coming up in today's newscast, IDF forces demolish the home of the terrorist who murdered Israel advocate Ari Fuld. Prime Minister Netanyahu arrives in Chad, and the Israeli Knesset celebrates its 70th birthday on the eve of the Tu-Bishvat holiday.
Syrian and Russian officials are accusing Israel today of launching a missile attack towards Damascus in broad daylight. Further, according to the Russian military, the barrage was blocked by Syrian air defense systems, and Israel, on the other hand, has not yet commented on the incident, but has stated that the Iron Dome has since intercepted a Syrian missile over Mount Hermon in the northern Golan Heights. Syrian news agencies reported that the alleged initial Israeli airstrike was against Hezbollah positions, though that hasn't been confirmed. And as for the Syrian strike, the IDF spokesperson's unit has yet to confirm whether the attack was retaliatory or offensive. Neither was the projectile's target revealed. Though regardless, security officials instructed citizens of the north to go about their daily lives, including upon the ski slopes of Mount Hermon, where thousands continued to enjoy the day. The IDF demolished the West Bank family home of the terrorist Khalil Jabarin on Friday, just over 4 months since he stabbed to death Israel advocate and father of four, Ari Fuld.
Demolition forces were met with stone throwers in Jabarin's hometown of Yatta near Hebron on the day of the demolition, but crowd dispersal methods were employed and there were no reported casualties. Now, the third-story apartment was mapped for demolition the day after the attack took place, but the Jabarin's family appealed twice, and the second appeal was rejected Thursday, however, and Supreme Court President Esther Hayut ordered an end to the delay in action. The IDF has already released video of the demolition that was carried out first thing Friday morning. Fuld was stabbed to death while speaking on his cell phone outside a supermarket in the Gush Etzion block on September 16, 2018. Even after being stabbed multiple times in the back and neck, however, Fuld managed to chase the terrorist and shoot him, potentially saving the life of a nearby shop worker who Jabarin had started to run towards. Fuld was an Israeli activist and an advocate who regularly contributed to many organizations as well as to ILTV, and he was posthumously awarded the Israel Police's Medal of Distinction. Meanwhile, the IDF has also now notified the family of Assem and Salih Barghouti that their home is slated for demolition on Sunday. The brothers are charged with carrying out 2 shooting attacks in Ofra and Givat Asaf and planning a third. Salih was shot dead by Israeli security forces during attempts to capture him in December, though, and Assem was finally arrested earlier in January. But their attacks left an emergency-born infant and 2 soldiers, Sergeant Yosef Cohen and Staff Sergeant Yovel Mor Yosef, dead, and at least 9 others were wounded.
20-year-old aspiring rapper Cody Herman was charged on Saturday for raping and murdering 21-year-old Israeli exchange student Aya Misawa in Melbourne, Australia last Tuesday.
Misawa was living nearby the scene of her attack while attending La Trobe University as part of an exchange program from Shanghai University in China. And at the time of the attack, she was FaceTiming her sister back in Israel while on her way home from a comedy show. Her body was found by people passing by only several hours later. Herman is now facing a possible life sentence for murder then, and up to 25 years for rape. He's not yet entered a plea, however, and is expected back in court on Monday. The Australian police called the attack horrific, and the Prime Minister Scott Morrison has also spoken out against this terrible tragedy.
Every woman in Australia, every person in Australia should be able to travel home in safety. I can't begin to think of what I could say to her family. I know what I'm thinking about her attacker. I suspect it's the same thing that all other Australians are thinking today. So I know the police will do their job and they'll deal with it. But the rest of the country has to wake up today and deal with the most despicable of crimes. So, my heartfelt condolences on behalf of myself and Jenny and my family to her family. And I just pray you can find whatever comfort you can in the worst of all circumstances. It's not something that we should do anything other than express great empathy and sympathy for the families of those who've suffered a terrible loss and just redouble our efforts on every occasion. It is just so shocking. I'm speechless. Thank you.
Morrison then met with Misawa's father, who had come to Australia to see the scene of the attack and to bring Aya's body home for burial.
I have many dreams to be with her, but I cannot now. to be more with Aya. I want to be with her more time. But someone decide I cannot be. I wish, I hope, I pray she have now in the more nice place and peace place and in the paradise.
In addition to Australian officials, though, hundreds of people attended vigils for Misawa over the weekend dressed in black. Flowers were placed where her body was found. The 86 train where Misawa was believed to have been before the attack was filled with flowers as well, and a Melbourne City pro soccer team wore black armbands on Saturday. Back in Israel, in Misawa's hometown of Baka al-Gharbiya on Saturday, protesters rallied for the quick return of Misawa's body and against the lack of response from the foreign minister's office. Israeli officials have still not commented on the murder.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in the Muslim African nation of Chad on Sunday for a half-day trip intended to re-establish diplomatic ties between the two countries. Multiple meetings between Netanyahu, Chad President Idris Deby, and other officials are set to take place in the capital of N'Djamena towards that end. And the visit also follows President Deby's surprise arrival in Israel a few months ago. Speaking from the runway ahead of his departure, Netanyahu again explained further why this visit is so important.
זה חלק מהמהפכה שאנחנו עושים בעולם הערבי והמוסלמי. הבטחתי לכם שזה יהיה, יהיו שם בשורות גדולות, ואני יכול להגיד לכם שני דברים. אחד, זה מאוד מטריד ואפילו מעלה זעם אצל איראן ואצל הפלסטינים שהם מנסים למנוע זאת, הם לא הצליחו. ושנית, יהיו עוד.
Now, if Chad and Israel were to resume official relations, Chad would become the 160th nation to have diplomatic ties with the Jewish state. And perhaps, as inferred, the ties look to be purely based on business. Israel would be supplying the African nation with arms, intelligence, and technology for improvements in security, water, and agriculture. Meanwhile, Chad would supposedly offer Israel more legitimacy in the Arab and African world, as well as some measure of protection in international forums. Though the photo op for Netanyahu ahead of April elections is also a likely factor. And some critics have raised the issue of whether or not it's worth it for Israel at all to do business with a nation that's been embroiled in conflict and is listed as the 18th least free country in the world. Still, if Chad and other Muslim African nations can resume ties with Israel, it's thought that more and more of the 54-state African bloc at the UN will follow suit and reverse its hostilities towards Israel on the world stage. In other news, just before his trip to Chad, Prime Minister Netanyahu welcomed his Romanian counterpart Viorica Dăncilă to Jerusalem over the weekend, where he also lauded the growing ties between their two countries and expressed optimism for future cooperation.
This is a wonderful opportunity to see you again. The relations between Israel and Romania are fantastic, and they'll be made even stronger by our visit. I hope that you will act to stop the bad resolutions against Israel in the EU, and also, of course, to move your embassy and other embassies to Jerusalem. We wait for you in Jerusalem.
Romania adopted a draft proposal to move its embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem shortly after United States President Donald Trump announced recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Romanian President Klaus Iohannis rejected the draft, however, and the move never progressed any further as there's still too much opposition in the Romanian parliament.
And now joining us to expand further on the renewed diplomatic relations with Chad is founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Schurman. Dr. Schurman, as always, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting me back again.
All right, so first of all, let's get right into it. Is the renewed relations with Chad the historic breakthrough that it's being hailed as?
Well, it's certainly a significant success. I think it's a little early to judge the long-term strategic impacts of the event. I'm always a little wary as to the long-term relations between Israel and the Islamic world. We've had two difficult experiences with Iran and Turkey, who were once very close allies of Israel, and once the regime changed, that turned it on its head. And today, instead of being allies, they're some of our most vehement enemies, particularly Iran.
But on the reverse of that coin, then, couldn't a current enemy become tomorrow's friend?
Well, yes. The question is, what are the underlying parameters? If it's regime to regime, perhaps. I don't know. Chad is not really a country where public opinion has a significant effect on the regime. I don't think that we should belittle the impact, and others may follow Chad's lead.
So you do agree, perhaps, with the Prime Minister Netanyahu that after Chad, other Muslim or Arab states, especially within Africa, might follow suit?
Oh, I think there's a good chance. The countries that have been mentioned are Sudan and maybe Bahrain, who broke off relations with Iran, and then countries like Mali and Niger have been mentioned. But I think we can analyze this event on three different levels. One is what we've been talking about now, the substantive impact diplomatically of the event. The other one, of course, is we shouldn't forget that this is all taking place in the run-up to the elections.
Sure.
And this is good for Netanyahu. He can always show diplomatic triumphs whilst his antagonists are obsessing over legalistic trivia like champagne and cigars. So I think this certainly won't harm his electoral chances and his stature as the elections approach. And the third thing is that the light that it shines on the Palestinian issue as a central stumbling block between Israel and the Muslim world. As time goes on, this is becoming more and more marginalized, and the stronger and more successful that image that Israel projects makes it a more desired partner. And we can see this has been pushed onto the back burner.
Is that issue more marginalized, though? Because you have many other countries, including now Chad, who have said, yes, we support X, Y, and Z as long as there's a two-state solution with 67 borders at the end, and then they go back to that.
Well, the Chad didn't do that. Chad renewed diplomatic relations without that. Saudi Arabia is...
No, but President Deby has stated in the past that he still places the Palestinian issue in very high regard, and that, a two-state solution needs to be...
Well, actions speak louder than words, I think. He's actually established diplomatic relations today without that being the case. I'm not quite sure that closer relations, even though they're not official, won't develop with other countries. Of course, these relations are driven more by a fear of Iran than much affection towards Israel. And who knows what happens if Iran is defanged, whether the old animosities won't re-emerge. So, I think it's certainly a significant achievement. Netanyahu has done very well on the diplomatic stage. We've seen what happened in Brazil. Brazil not many years ago wouldn't even accept our ambassador, and now they're embracing us. So I think Netanyahu can chalk this up as a significant achievement. The long-term effect, the jury is still out.
All right, and with that, unfortunately, we're going to have to call it. Dr. Schurman, as always, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
All right, this just in. Israeli officials are reportedly going to be revoking the permits for schools in East Jerusalem that are being run by the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees. This is just the latest strike against the UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, which has recently had its budget cut down by the United States.
And the permits will be revoked starting next school year, according to Israel's Chadashot News, and will instead be replaced by schools run by the Jerusalem municipality and therefore the Israeli Education Ministry. Israel claims that the UN agency is perpetuating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by making it harder for Palestinian refugees to settle abroad. Israeli officials have called for the organization to be shut down and for refugees involved to be absorbed into other UN programs as well. As of now, that isn't happening, though, but the Israeli National Security Council is on a mission to expel UNRWA from East Jerusalem. Today, UNRWA runs 7 schools within 2 refugee camps that sit in Jerusalem's municipal boundaries, and at least 3,000 students will be affected by the revoked permits. But former Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat says that the decision sends a clear message that, quote, there are no refugees in Jerusalem, only residents. They will receive their services from the Jerusalem municipality alone, like all other residents, end quote. East Jerusalem Palestinians hold Israeli residency cards but are not Israeli citizens and have accused the city of discrimination for decades when it comes to providing municipal services. Israel recently pushed forward a 5 billion shekel plan then to invest in Arab areas of East Jerusalem.
According to IDF interrogators, a Palestinian man from Gaza was arrested Friday morning after attempting to cross illegally into Israel from the Strip, and he later identified himself as a member of the Hamas terror group. Regardless of his affiliation, however, reports show that the man in question was unarmed when he was detained and that he surrendered immediately. The man's motives are not yet known by the public, though many Palestinians both in Gaza and the West Bank regularly attempt to cross the border into Israel illegally, both for the sake of terror and for the sake of escaping hardships in the territories. That being said, also on Friday, around 10,000 Palestinians again gathered along the Gaza-Israel border for resumed clashes with IDF troops. So-called protesters threw rocks, explosives, firebombs, and more, while burning tires and attempting to break through or damage the border fences. The IDF responded with tear gas and live fire, and Hamas claims 43 people were injured. Meanwhile, on a related note, despite Hamas and Israeli officials negotiating through Egyptian mediation, the terror group on Saturday denied any reports that Israel and Hamas were engaged in discussions of a prisoner swap ahead of Israeli elections in April. Hamas is, however, demanding that thousands of Palestinian terrorists in prison be released, while Israel demands the return of civilians Hisham al-Sayed and Avram Mengistu, as well as the bodies of IDF soldiers Hadar Golden and Oron Shaul. An explosive new report last week from Israeli Yediot Ahronot News revealed that in spite of the United States government shutdown, the U.S. plans to purchase 2 Israeli Iron Dome missile defense batteries at a cost of around $373 million. Additionally, the reports go on to suggest that the new additions to America's military are part of a larger $1.7 billion project. As part of the deal, the United States will acquire 12 launchers, 2 radar detection units, 2 battlement management centers, and 240 interceptors. All in all, the sale represents the first major instance that Israel is selling the full defense system to the U.S. But according to Yediot Ahronot, unlike being stationed in Israel for the defense of Israel's borders, the United States Army intends to deploy the technology on the battlefield to protect its forces from missiles, drones, mortars, and more. Further, the United States Army hopes to, quote, componentize the Iron Dome system in order to merge it with current U.S. Army tech and needs. That process alone will likely cost around $1.6 billion through the next 5 years, but this deal is slated to be completed as soon as 2020. Hundreds of women's marches erupted all across the United States and abroad this weekend for the 3rd year in a row, again to call attention to systemic issues facing women and indeed all society as Washington continues with its partial government shutdown. But while hundreds of thousands showed up for what is certainly an excellent cause, many thousands more, including top American officials, celebrities, and organizations, either retracted their support for the movement or marched in parallel demonstrations due to the persisting allegations of anti-Semitism plaguing the Women's March leadership.
In fact, in November, one of the movement's core founders, Teresa Shook, called on her colleagues Bob Bland, Tamika Mallory, Carmen Perez, and Linda Sarsour to step down for having, quote, steered the movement away from its true course, end quote. And New York Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand was among the latest to speak out against anti-Semitism in the Women's March in Iowa, where she's currently campaigning. According to CNN, Gillibrand said, quote, we know there's no room for anti-Semitism in our movement. We know this, and we know that our movement is empowered when all of us lift each other up, end quote. Yet the 4 aforementioned March leaders have not yet been able to make any sort of similar comment, which has simply fueled allegations against them. Just last week, when co-chairs Tamika Mallory and Bob Bland appeared on TV show The View, Mallory refused to condemn the racist and homophobic remarks of Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan. Instead, she said that she doesn't share his language. But the preacher has called Jewish people termites as recently as just a few months ago, and both Mallory and co-chair Carmen Perez have expressed their support publicly for him in the past. Then, in another interview with PBS, due to air on Sunday, Mallory again refused to answer a question regarding Israel's right to exist. And finally, Racism Monitor Canary Mission also just released their Women's March expose, in which details about all 4 of those mentioned, Perez, Bland, Sarsour, and Mallory, are documented and presented.
Only under this idea that we have to accept you as a Zionist and a feminist because you want to impose that on everybody else in the movement, I'm just letting you know that's just not how it works anymore.
Again, I want to make the distinction that while anti-Semitism is something that impacts Jewish Americans, it's different than anti-black racism or Islamophobia because it's not systemic.
You can see the full video on the Canary Mission homepage and social media.
Anti-Israel protesters burst onto the platform in France on Saturday to interrupt a qualifying round for the Eurovision Song Competition as Israeli singer Netta Barzilai stood on stage. Barzilai, who won the 2018 Eurovision competition, made a special appearance during the semi-final of Destination Eurovision, the French television show which selects the country's contestant for the singing contest. And while there, she performed her winning song, Toy. But after her performance, as the host called the contestants on stage, a small group of protesters jumped on stage to interrupt the show. The protesters then held up signs saying no to Eurovision 2019 in Israel before they were quickly escorted away by security. The BDS France movement took credit for the disturbance, calling to boycott the Eurovision competition because it is set to take place in Israel, calling it Destination Apartheid. But following the incident, France 2, which aired the show, defended its decision to participate in the competition and said in a statement that, quote, music has no borders, end quote. Barzilai also responded to the event and said that 5 people who came to spread darkness and not speak about music and love won't bother me on a night like this. The 2019 Eurovision Song Competition is set to take place in Tel Aviv in May, and the annual event is set to receive widespread media attention while drawing tens of thousands of fans to the Jewish state. This has made it a prime target for anti-Israel protesters and pro-BDS activists, though, who are calling on countries and individuals to boycott the event, so far with little success. Now, those of you who have been with us for a while, you'll know my next guest pretty well, but for anyone who doesn't know her, former host of Israel Daily, Natasha Kirchuk, is back, and she's hosting an all-new program called Insight to Israel, which is slated to premiere tonight. So please welcome my favorite host on television, Natasha Kirchuk.
Aaron, how does it feel to be sitting in that chair?
I gotta tell you, it feels great.
It does. You
really
look
great.
good.
Oh, thank you.
You sit well.
And well, welcome back. You look great as well. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And,
well, I'm very excited because, like you said, we're premiering a totally new show called Insight to Israel. And we're essentially trying to bring positive news to our viewers. We're taking an inside look at a lot of human stories, the people and faces that make Israel what it is. So in this week's episode, we're actually going to be visiting the oldest tattoo parlor in the world. We're going to be learning about an organization that helps young couples who would like to get married in Israel actually be able to afford their weddings. I know that's something that's coming up for you.
I would certainly benefit from this.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the teaser for now. I don't want to give away too much.
Yeah, I don't want too many spoilers or anything. I want people to make sure that they tune in for the program. But let's take a look at the clip that you got for us. Okay, so it looks amazing. I absolutely cannot wait to see this show.
I know. You better tune in tonight.
I definitely will. Okay, again, you gave us like a little sneak peek. Give us a little bit more, tell us a little bit of something.
I can't give you too much. Like I said, I think my favorite piece of the week, like I said, would be the fact that we actually went to Jerusalem. We visited the oldest tattoo parlor in the world. This is a tattoo parlor that has been around for 700 years.
And it's a family kind of...
It's a family-run business, 27 generations of tattoo artists.
Yeah,
we sat down with Wasim Razzouk. He is the latest generation. His son, who is 15 years old, will soon be taking over the tattoo parlor. But he, on a daily basis, gives dozens of tattoos to visitors who come to his shop from around the world. And they want a souvenir of Jerusalem. It's something to prove that they were actually here in the Holy Land.
And that's definitely a way to do it and to carry around that proof
it's
forever.
Definitely a way. I didn't get a tattoo myself, but I was tempted.
Next time.
All right, so tune in, everybody.
Tune in. Insight to Israel. Natasha, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right, it looks like the Knesset is now set to celebrate its 70th birthday in the spirit of the holidays, or should we say a very specific holiday, Jewish holiday, Tu-Bishvat. This year's celebrations are to be set more modest because of the upcoming elections, though, but thousands of visitors from across the country are still expected to make it to the festivities.
First, the Knesset will be holding an open house in honor of its 70th year, and more than 2,000 students, soldiers, and senior citizens are about to attend. The Agricultural Ministry will be decorating the entire affair with fruit in honor of Tu-Bishvat as well, and Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi David Lau will be holding a celebratory prayer in the Knesset synagogue. Then, visitors will even be given the chance to plant blue and white flowers to create the number 70 in the entrance square of the Knesset. But not everything is fun and games. The Israeli parliament is also clearly trying to step up its game this year and think outside the box with celebrations. The Dialogue in the Dark Museum in Holon, for example, is planning on using a room in the Knesset to help visitors experience what it's like to be blind. And the event will be held right before a lecture on the Knesset's efforts to find jobs for more people with disabilities, too.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Thanks to the emergency actions taken by the Israeli Navy over the weekend, a French national who was lost at sea was saved. So today's word is nischaf, meaning adrift or washed away. Now, it didn't take long for Jean-Francois Colas to become nischaf, or adrift, after his navigational systems died, his anchor chain broke. But I bet that while he was drifting, or nischaf, he never imagined where he'd actually end up. Well, thankfully, it was towards the shoreline, because Colas had been nischaf just long enough to nearly be out of food and water. So the moral is to remember that if you plan to venture out into a world without any landmarks, like the sea, bring extra rations and maybe a compass or two. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy and cool with a low of 51 or 11 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow should be clear and sunny with a slight rise in temperatures to a high of 67 or 19 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.69 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.